This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios.
What a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
It is Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. We will have the Rays and the Astros coming up in progress at the top of the hour. Coming up at 6:20, we'll get into college football, though. Kerry James from Bleacher Report will be joining us to get into the college football schedule. Some cancellations cleared out the schedule, so not as many games to preview and pick tomorrow, but it's definitely on the schedule. So we got to get to that. We'll have Georgia, Alabama right here on 97.3 ESPN tomorrow night. It's a pretty busy football weekend. We got high school football tomorrow at noon on 97.3 ESPN. That would be Ocean City versus Cedar Creek. Tom Williams and the Prime Events team on the call tomorrow at noon, following Billy Schweim in the locker room. And then tomorrow night, Georgia and Alabama. Sunday, the triple-header. Eagles, Ravens at 1. We have Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady right after the Eagles game. And then you got that, ho-hum Sunday Night Football. Isn't it so weird that Sunday Night Football is the lesser of the matchups? Usually Sunday Night Football, the primetime game, is usually the game that everyone looks forward to. And they call it waiting all day for Sunday night. And you're waiting all day for the Rams and the 49ers, and you're not even really sure who's even playing, not because of COVID reasons, but because of health reasons. I mean, both teams are pretty banged up. But still a great weekend here on 97.3 ESPN for football. The PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open at 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. 609-403-0973 with the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. And I want to start with the Eagles injury report. For those of you who have not seen it, you can get all the details right now at 973ESPN.com. But there are 7 players who are ruled out. 7 who are ruled out for this Sunday. And some of them are pretty significant names. Lane Johnson did not practice at all this week. He's ruled out. Despite being at practice, Alshon Jeffrey ruled out. Deshaun Jackson ruled out. And I have to admit, I didn't think the Eagles were going to win this game, and I'll give you my final score at the end of the show today. So basically 50 minutes from now, you can hang out and wait for that. Let you know if I think the Eagles are going to cover or not. But it's not looking good, folks. It's one thing to be without Avonte Maddox. You were already without him last week. It's another thing to be without Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey. You've been without them for a couple weeks. But another week without Lane Johnson and him being in question is a huge concern. When he had that ankle procedure, the idea was that it was going to allow him to play this season. You get this procedure done in August in order for you to be able to play this year. And now he's not playing again. He didn't even practice this week. At least Alshon and Deshaun were limited participants at practice. Lane is just a straight-up DNP. And that is a huge, massive, incredible concern for this team because in this division where, let's be realistic, you do have a chance at winning the division because the Giants are just that bad. Washington is not much better. And the Cowboys are without Dak Prescott. You have a chance at winning the division. And let me tell you something. I have to be very concerned about the Eagles' chances of doing that without Lane Johnson. Everybody can put their hand up and talk about Jim Schwartz and Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson all you want. But there is a track record. When Lane Johnson plays, the Eagles have a win percentage during his time in Philadelphia of around 60%. Without him, they're under 500. I don't think that's a coincidence. He's that important. To be without him for any period of time is a serious concern. And if I'm the Eagles and I'm looking around, I'm like, all right, what do we do moving forward? I have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns about how I'm going to get by without him. And I understand that this week, a lot of people didn't expect the Eagles to win the game anyway. Okay, the expectations were not that the Eagles were going to have a great chance at winning this game in the first place. And I totally understand that. And maybe there is an attitude of, well, we were going to lose this game anyway. Doesn't matter, right? But it still matters. Because the more time goes by without Lane Johnson on the field, the more questions you have about his availability. Again, we were told, the attitude, the information presented to us was Lane Johnson's going to miss time, but we know he'll be back because he had this surgery so he can play this year. And then it was Lane Johnson ruptured a cyst. All right. Had to have a cleanup for that. All right. Had to deal with that. Now he's going to miss more time. This is one of the most important players on this team. I have serious concerns. And if he's not back for next week and he's not fully good to go, I'm going to have a lot of questions about this team moving forward. And this is not a negative against Jack Driscoll. He did a solid job when he has played this year, whether it's against Washington or whether it was the 49ers game. He is more than competent as a backup offensive lineman filling in for Lane Johnson. But Lane Johnson is a all-pro level tackle. I remember Sal Palantonio mentioned this on the Sports Bash a couple weeks ago. He told Mike Gill, he said, Lane Johnson rolls out of bed and he's an all-pro right tackle. And anybody who's got two eyes that can understand football know how great and how important Lane Johnson is. And I'm looking at this Eagles game this Sunday, and I'm saying it might not be as big a deal this Sunday because the Eagles are probably going to lose anyway. But for Lane Johnson to not practice at all this week and then be ruled out is a huge red flag for me moving forward. It's something that we are all going to track here on 97.3 ESPN and at 97.3ESPN.com, where you can catch the full injury report, 97.3ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Again, Philadelphia Eagles, 7 players ruled out for this Sunday. Get the full list and all the details right now at 97.3ESPN.com. Another item that we will be keeping an eye on through the weekend with the Eagles also is the news that came out about Matt Pryor. Now, I'm going to give you the story and the information, and then I'm going to explain to you what it means, because I don't want people just to react and hear and run with it, okay? Even though I know some people love to do that, we're going to have an honest conversation about this. So the Eagles placed Matt Pryor on the reserve COVID-19 list. Now, what that means is that Matt Pryor either himself tested positive for COVID-19 or he was in close contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19. Now, this does not mean that the Eagles game this Sunday is not going to happen. It does not mean that at all. And here's why. First of all, almost every team in the league has had a positive test or two, and they've been able to play games. Every team has had a guy go on and off the COVID list. Doug Peterson, I thought, gave the most honest and important explanation today about the protocols. Because we've been seeing a lot of guys with the label illness. Just yesterday, Dr. Alan Sills of the NFL said, we are telling guys, even if they are not testing positive for COVID and they have symptoms, to not come to the facility and to stay home. Don't even come in. Remember, Odell Beckham Jr. was sent home feeling sick, but he didn't test positive for COVID. He's been negative every day, every time he's tested this week. The NFL is embracing a abundance of caution culture. And whether we like that or not, that's how they feel it's necessary to proceed forward. That's their protocol. What Doug Peterson said today was very important. He said, quote, I can't announce a lot of things publicly, but we've got to take everything into precaution, whether a guy has an upset stomach or he has a headache or he's got whatever it could be. It doesn't even have to be COVID related. We have to take everything seriously. Peterson goes on to say, as he said to the media today, we've got to protect the entire team and the organization. We're making sure that in this case with Matt Pryor, we want to make sure that everybody is healthy. We're testing daily, which is part of the protocol so far. We have been clean and clear. At the same time, we've got to take precautions to make sure that if something does happen, we're prepared, we're ready. We've got to stick to the guidelines, the protocols that have been in place. And with that in context, Dr. Alan Sills yesterday explaining to the media about the protocols, they're telling guys not to come in even if they have tested negative for COVID. Look what's going on just in all the sports right now. Football, NFL, college football, what happened in baseball back in August. Look at what's going on all over the place. The testing positive is not the problem. It's just like you're not going to get mad at somebody if they get a cold or they get something like that. Okay, the issue is not testing positive for COVID, because as long as the people are asymptomatic and they have no long-term side effects, it is what it is. Look at the positive tests going on around all over the place. All right? It's still there. It's still a topic. What becomes a problem is when you have a situation that's going on with Baylor football team right now. They have 29 guys testing positive recently. The Titans had over 20 players test positive. The Baylor football program has basically been temporarily shut down because of positive tests. And poor Houston Cougars, they couldn't play for weeks because all of their opponents kept having COVID issues when they had none. Florida shut down their game this weekend. Why? Because there were too many players who tested positive and then too many guys who were quarantined for contact tracing. There's a huge difference between a handful of people testing positive and a slew of people, over 20 plus, testing positive. So don't take the Matt Pryor situation and read too much into it. One person testing positive or two people testing positive is not the end of the world. Look what happened this week with the Falcons and the Colts. The story came out yesterday morning. The Falcons had 4 people test positive. The Falcons pushed back and said, no, we didn't. They reran all the tests again. They reopened the facilities today. You know why? Because they proceeded with an abundance of caution. The Indianapolis Colts thought they had a bunch of positive tests today. This morning, it wasn't looking that good. Again, another report of 4 positive tests. And then things get turned around, and you know what the news report comes out after that? They had 1 player and 3 staff members with initial troubling test results, but they were all false positives after reruns. So guess what? This is what we're dealing with. One person tests positive, another person has a false positive. It's just what we got to deal with until until the science and the medicine fully catches up. Frankly, there's probably not going to be that much that's going to change until at least the end of November and December. I know Pfizer just came out today and said that they hope to have a vaccine that won't be ready no earlier than the end of November. So take that for whatever it's worth. Until we get to a point where the science and the medicine are fully caught up with this situation, which it's very frustrating that it's not yet, but This is what we're dealing with. So don't be jumping too high or come to conclusions about Matt Pryor or the Eagles game. The Eagles game is still happening. As of right now, it's only one guy testing positive, and almost every team has had at least one person test positive at some point or another. In the majority of games that gotten played, the only two teams that have had their schedules scrambled at this point in time are the Patriots and the Titans. And the Titans was because they had 20-plus people test positive. And then for the Patriots, their reason was because of the timing of the positive tests. They landed on dates that conflicted with their ability to travel. So, just wanted to lay that all out there for all of you here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig here on Game Night, being brought to you by Matt Black Kia. Matt Black Kia wants to get you approved today. That's Matt Black Kia on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. 609-403-0973 for the PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coming up on the other side, Kerry James, Bleacher Report, college football writer, will join us to talk about college football week 7. Of course, you hear college football tomorrow night right here on 97.3 ESPN. Georgia, Alabama coverage begins at 7:30.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Don't forget, we'll get you some picks a little bit later this hour. College football back in action tomorrow. Catch Georgia versus Alabama tomorrow night. 7:30 begins the coverage right here on 97.3 ESPN. Talk more about that and the college football week 7 slate. Being joined by Kerry Miller from Bleacher Report right now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Kerry, how you doing today?
Hey, Josh, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you jumping on. You know, there's a lot of eyeballs on this Georgia-Alabama game. I want to start with you there because, you know, for a lot of people, you know, they were looking at this game, you know, it's Saban versus his former assistant, another one of those scenarios, but then Saban gets COVID. Now they're saying there's an outside chance Saban could be back if he doesn't have negative tests in a row. I mean, the whole thing is just such a bizarre wave of stories and emotion going through this week.
Yeah, I mean, we expected there to be the postponements that we've had throughout the season. Maybe not as many as there have been, but having this coaching issue involving COVID is a whole new wrinkle that I don't think we were really thinking about before the season began. I mean, we've had several coaches contract the virus in the past 6 weeks, but yeah, this is definitely a weird wrinkle, a game time decision as to whether Saban will be allowed to coach or not. Because I know there's have to have 3 consecutive negative tests, at least 24 hours apart. So I think the third test will be 2 hours before kickoff. So Georgia's not even going to know if he's going to be out there. It'll be interesting for sure. I think we're all going to find out pretty much as we turn on the TV whether or not Saban is there, and that's certainly an X factor. Obviously, you know, if he's not allowed to be there, make those halftime adjustments. We saw the lines in Vegas move as soon as the positive test news broke. I think the spread dropped from 7 to 4 points or something like that. So apparently that's at least Saban's worth a field goal.
Right, exactly. And the other thing that's interesting with this is that, you know, when you look at this matchup, you know, if it was Steve Sarkisian having to run the team instead of Nick, you would have to assume that there's a totally different mood and mentality with the game because, let's be realistic, Sark he's a solid coach, but he's nowhere even near the stratosphere of Nick Saban.
No, he's not. But I think that that offense is just so good that, you know, he can step in and make those play calls that, you know, he makes anyway as the OC. But, you know, Mac Jones, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Najee Harris, whether Saban's there or not, those guys are going to get points. You know, the real question is going to be, can they make the changes on defense that they were unable to make against Ole Miss? If that same defense shows up, I mean, Georgia's not an offensive juggernaut by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, Georgia's good enough to score 42 points against the defense we saw against Ole Miss.
You mentioned the Alabama defense. Outside of Patrick Surtain II and Dylan Moses, I think most people are not really sure who's out there on defense for Alabama, and that really became an eyesore in that Ole Miss game.
Yeah, their linebacker core is solid, but we had question marks about the secondary coming into the season. Surtain was the only guy, only returning starter in the secondary, and you're really seeing that. What's the opposite of pay dividends? Is taking dividends. They're really struggling to defend the pass. I looked up this stat yesterday, dating back to 2009. Alabama's averaged 4.7 passes defended per game in each season or better in every year. This year they're at 3. So like a severe drop off from where they're usually at in the ability to break up passes, the ability to get interceptions. Like I said, Georgia's no juggernaut. Stetson Bennett, he's not the second coming of Tua Tagovailoa or anything like that. But against that defense, a game manager type of quarterback can do enough for Georgia to get that win.
Kerry Miller joining us here on the Boardwalk on the hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Check out the Bleacher Report. Be our experts. Answer the biggest college football questions for Week 7 right now over there on BleacherReport.com. Kerry, also the big picture of the SEC. Most people assume that Alabama is going to win this game, but where does that leave Georgia? We know that Florida then has a loss. Georgia has a loss. Where does that leave the SEC East with both Florida, who's now sitting out the weekend, and Georgia then potentially having a loss?
Yeah, I think regardless of what happens in this game, most people assume the SEC East is going to come down to the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, or what's left of it in COVID world. That Georgia-Florida game, I think it's November 7th, maybe the 14th, but that's going to be the deciding factor because that's basically a win and a half for whoever gets it in the standings. Tennessee's pretty good, but I think we saw in that game against Georgia last week that they're not quite on the same level as Georgia and Florida. So, even if Georgia loses this game, as long as they beat Florida, they'll still be effectively up a game and a half on the Gators. I don't think they'll be able to lose enough to the rest of their schedule to fall behind them. So I still think that's the deciding factor. And same goes for the West. If Alabama loses this game, it's still going to come down to them playing probably Auburn in the Iron Bowl. I think that's Thanksgiving weekend this year. So, for both teams, a loss, not the end of the world. They'll probably both still be projected for the college football playoff after this weekend.
You mentioned the schedule. We know with Florida now, their game with LSU is tentatively rescheduled for December 12th. It's almost ironic that all these games are being rescheduled for December 12th, considering December 12th is the game for Army-Navy, and historically they usually have the data themselves, and now they have a fully loaded schedule of reschedules and rebooks and Big Ten games, and it's going to be an interesting end of the year, and that's why I want to ask you, with all these games being pushed off to the end of the year, how many of these games do you think are actually going to get made up, considering that how many teams maybe look at their schedule and say, we got 6 games in, that's enough?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think the Florida plays Missouri next week, allegedly. And we don't know whether that game will get played because, if you call off one game with the 14-day cutoff for positive tests, it's likely the next one's going to get postponed as well. And, will they be able to make that one up if there are further postponements? It's, right now we've had December 12th was kind of the buffer that they put in before the season began. I think the ACC and SEC both said the conference championship will either be the 12th or the 19th, which we all assumed meant it will be the 19th. But, both the ACC and SEC have now burned that buffer, and we're not even through October yet. So eventually these games are going to be canceled, not postponed. And, it'll be a question of which ones are most important to make up, probably. I think if Florida's in trouble, they'll have to make up the LSU game, not the Missouri game, because that's the tougher opponent, I would say.
Well, it's tougher in theory. I mean, LSU's defense can't stop anybody, but neither can
Yeah.
Florida. So I mean, I don't even know what that means anymore. Missouri just beat LSU. LSU's defense can't stop a fly.
Yeah, neither can Florida's. So I was expecting, if they had played that game, potentially 100 points, because those defenses are awful and both those quarterbacks are pretty darn good. But it's probably for the best for both of those teams that game is now postponed 2 months so they can figure out their severe issues on defense.
What do you think about, staying in the SEC, what do you think about Mississippi State in their situation? Because they came out, like we mentioned with LSU, they were gangbusters. I mean, they were run up and down the field. And then the last 2 games, they just keep shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, every time I look over at Mississippi State, that Mike Leach offense doesn't look like a Mike Leach offense anymore. It looks like it's just a bunch of kids who don't know how to run the playbook.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly Kentucky kind of showed the blueprint to beat in the air raid offense. You rush 3, you drop 8, and then those the 10-yard out routes aren't open, and they don't know what to do. That's been the Texas Tech, Washington State, and now Mississippi State formulas. It's just chunk gains over and over again. They have no run game whatsoever, even with Kylan Hill. That's just I think he was second or third in the SEC in rushing yards last year. Now they just, they don't know the blocking scheme anymore to even run the ball with a great running back. So, as great as that offense can be, it is kind of one-dimensional, and I think we're going to see certainly some copycat going on with teams trying to replicate what Kentucky did. But Texas A&M, they're going to be in trouble this week against that offense because the last 2 weeks, back-to-back games. I mean, I know it was Florida and Alabama, very good quarterbacks, but back-to-back games allowing at least, 70% completion, at least 300 yards, I think at least 4 passing touchdowns. I mean, that air raid offense can get healthy in a hurry against that defense.
In your article over at BleacherReport.com, Kerry Miller joining us here on Game Night. Check it out. The biggest college football questions for Week 7. You bring up the ACC, and you mentioned a couple of teams like Notre Dame, UNC, and their games this weekend. Of those 2 teams, after we saw Miami got kicked to the curb by Clemson, do either one of those teams have a chance of within 10 points of Clemson?
I'm not sure. I know that Clemson plays at Notre Dame. I believe that game is November 7th. So we've got another couple of weeks to try and gauge both of those teams. Right now, I would say no. Clemson looks a lot better, a lot more well-rounded, a lot better on defense than both Notre Dame and certainly the defensive component with North Carolina. But they don't play UNC. If they did, it would be in the ACC championship. So that's over 2 months from now. So who knows, things could change between now and then. But it's really going to be, if Notre Dame or North Carolina is to beat Clemson, they're going to have to do it with their run game, which they're very good running. But we thought the same of Miami heading into last Saturday night. I think Miami got like 70 rushing yards and was unable to establish anything on offense against that Clemson defense. So, we kind of thought for a couple of weeks there with the AP rankings that the second tier of the ACC was catching up, but I don't buy it. I think Clemson's still head and shoulders ahead of the crowd. They haven't lost a regular season game in 3 years. And I don't see that happening anytime soon either.
With that being said, let's run down the rabbit hole of, let's say Clemson does run the table, win the ACC championship. Is there a team in college football that they would potentially face in the playoff that would give them the biggest, they always say you always have a game plan until you get punched in the face. Is there a team that can give them that kind of punch in the face to make them reevaluate?
I think Georgia would be a great matchup for them, just because Georgia has an outstanding defense, and though that offense isn't all that great yet, I think they're going to continue to improve throughout the season, whether that's Stetson Bennett at quarterback for the rest of the year or whether they get USC transfer JT Daniels in there eventually, and that kind of opens up the playbook a little bit more in terms of downfield passing. But I think certainly from a defensive standpoint, Georgia would be the toughest test. And Alabama has the offense to score on anybody. So either of those teams would be a tough draw. And whoever wins the Big Ten, I guess we're assuming it'll be Ohio State. We don't know what Ohio State looks like yet, but if they come out and they look really good against Nebraska, Penn State to start the season, I mean, by early November, we'll be buying Ohio State as one of the top candidates to win it all. So, I mean, those are clearly the top 4 teams right now. I mean, you look at the AP rankings, Notre Dame, and North Carolina at 4 and 5, and I think they're way behind Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia, and theoretically behind Ohio State if they are what we think they are.
Yeah, you mentioned Ohio State in the Big Ten. What are you expecting when the Big Ten does resume? Because I don't really know what it's going to look like, because we know what the SEC is like. Everyone forgot to play defense this year when they finally resumed. So for the Big Ten, they're going to be waiting even a month plus longer than the SEC did to start. Could we expect maybe a similar situation where Big Ten football turns into shootout football because maybe the defenses are just not ready?
It could. My theory with the SEC defense is more in everything they lost from last year and then didn't have the summer to replace those guys. 23 of the top 97 picks in the 2020 NFL draft were defensive players from the SEC. It was Auburn, Alabama, Florida, and LSU were hit hardest by those departures, and those are the 4 defenses that have taken the largest steps backwards thus far. So I don't know if the Big Ten will have the same issues, but, I mean, they do have quarterbacks capable of destroying bad defenses. I mean, Justin Fields is awesome. Sean Clifford at Penn State is plenty capable. Minnesota's quarterback, named Tanner Morgan, really good quarterback. If Rashad Bateman's able to return at wide receiver for them, so they have some quality offenses. But I think the Big Ten, their typical hard-nosed defense will survive this COVID scare. They'll still be more low scoring, certainly in the SEC. Maybe it'll be a little higher than we're used to seeing from the Big Ten, but I don't think we'll see many, 49 to 42 types of games.
He's Kerry Miller joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. Check out biggest college football questions for Week 7 answered right now at BleacherReport.com, where you can download the Bleacher Report app. Kerry, appreciate your time today. Appreciate the insights on college football, and I'm sure it's going to continue to be an interesting season, to say the least.
Yep. We'll see how many games are actually played this weekend. But, yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Thank you. Of course, for anybody who's interested, SMU does lead 10-7 over Tulane right now. It's a shootout in potential right now, early on. Also, in other action, we will be joining the Rays and Astros in progress following game night here on 97.3 ESPN. Currently, the Astros are at bat. Blake Snell on the mound. 0-0 tie game. Currently in the top of the second. Again, the Rays lead 3-2 in that series. Trying to close it out with Blake Snell, man on first base. 2 outs for the Astros. We'll get to all the action coming up after game night at 7 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN, followed by Dodgers and Braves right after the Rays and the Astros. 609-403-0973 with PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board to get on the conversation. Place your legal sports bets at PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now and they'll match your first deposit up to $250. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 609-403-0973 with PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board coming up next. I'll give you my picks for the college football weekend. Also, my opinion about what will happen with the Eagles game. I told you I don't think the Eagles are going to win, but will they cover? For those of you out there who may be so interested, I'll give you my thoughts and perspective on the game next here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM, and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app is for free thanks to First Bank of Sea Isle City.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Game Night being brought to you by GMS Law. Make the right call with 4 convenient locations to serve you. Visit them online at gmslaw.com. GameNight.com. Of course, we got the Astros and Rays coming up tonight, followed by Dodgers and Braves baseball doubleheader right here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get you my college football picks for the weekend coming up in just a few minutes. The record on the season is 26-16 so far for the college football picks this year. 609-403-0973 for the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. So, for the Philadelphia Eagles tomorrow, before I tell you what I think is going to happen, I will give you what I think they need to do in order to win this game. We know that there's one team that has been the thorn in the side for the Baltimore Ravens over the last couple of years. There's one team that has consistently been able to figure out the enigma known as Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense. The Ravens, since Lamar Jackson became the starting quarterback during the regular season, are 18-3. It's pretty doggone impressive, right? The one team that has consistently beaten them, though, is the Kansas City Chiefs. And the other team that, for better or worse, made them look really bad was the Tennessee Titans. Both of those teams have specific defensive strategies. And the defensive strategies that they use against the Ravens are this. Number one, they don't worry about Lamar Jackson running as much as containing his running. So the idea is not to stop him from running, because that's impossible, okay? You weren't able to always stop Randall Cunningham. You weren't always able to stop Michael Vick. You were never always able to stop any of the high-level mobile quarterbacks over the years, Steve Young, etc. Lamar's in that same category. He is an elite mobile quarterback. The problem for Lamar when he played the Titans last year in the postseason and the Chiefs these last two seasons is they limit his ability to impact the game with his feet. They're not telling him you can't run. They're telling him we're not going to let you run all the time. The second thing that both of those defenses did is they blanketed the receivers. The tight ends like Mark Andrews, wide receivers like Hollywood Brown. They did not let those guys get separation. One of the keys to the Ravens offense with the misdirection, with the option plays, with the run pass option, the triple option threat, all the things that they do. All of those things are predicated on the idea of creating space for the receivers. You go back and watch Greg Roman when he was the offensive coordinator for the 49ers with Colin Kaepernick and John Harbaugh as head coach, or when he was the OC in Buffalo with Tyrod Taylor, and now in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson. When they have success, it's because the threat of the running quarterback is there, not to specifically run the quarterback, but create space for the receivers. The threat of the quarterback takes a defender out of pass coverage. The idea is that you're going to remove more defenders from pass coverage in order for you to get space. One of the reasons why when you watch a Ravens game in the last couple of years and you see multiple receivers wide open at times, right? Or huge gaps in the defense, Mark Andrews or any of those guys, it's because they have this offense that is built to use the mobility of the quarterback and the threat of the run game to create more space in the secondary. You can't run as much man-to-man defense because the quarterback is going to gain yards while your back is turned. You have trouble running coverage zones because the zones require the defenders to be in a certain space on the field, and not to overlap as much, allowing there to be more opportunities for that offense. The entire offense is built on manipulating the defense. So how do you counter that? You don't give the Ravens a straight man or a straight zone. You give him a blended look. So when Greg Roman is calling the plays and when Lamar Jackson is walking up to the line, he doesn't always know what he's looking at. Or he thinks he knows what he's looking at, and as soon as the ball is snapped, you show him something completely different. One of the things that the Chiefs have done incredibly well is that they make it look like they're blitzing, and then they don't. They bring all these bodies up to the line of scrimmage, right? It looks like they're coming with a 6-man blitz, and instead they only bring 3 guys. And then one guy's on the spy on Lamar Jackson, and everybody else is dropped into coverage, limiting his ability to find an open receiver. That's the key to slowing down the Ravens' offense. I just don't think the Philadelphia Eagles, though, have the personnel capable of doing that. Because even if Darius Slay can play, he's currently questionable, he has concussion issue, even if he does play, he's only got Hollywood Brown. If Will Parks plays, let's say he gets Mark Andrews, right? Okay, so you covered 2 players. You only have 2 guys covered. This kid, Miles Boykin, he finds ways to get open. Willie Snead has made an entire career of being the overlooked receiver who gets catches and touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins out of the backfield, watch out. This guy is going to be the next Alvin Kamara. He's that talented. And don't forget, Mark Ingram, he can run you over. That tight end, Nick Boyle, he's very good blocker. He's also a very good catcher. How are you going to cover everyone when everyone knows on the other team that your linebackers can't cover anyone? So it doesn't matter if you lock down Brown and Andrews, there's going to be somebody else potentially open. And whether that's Nate Gary or whether that's Cravon LeBlanc or whether that's whoever covering those guys, I don't believe the Eagles can keep up. And as a result, when I look at the Philadelphia Eagles, I see a team that probably just can't win this game. I think the Eagles lose 30-20. So they don't cover. Speaking of picks, let's run down the picks real quick here. College football games tomorrow. I got Navy going -7 at East Carolina. Look, the reports are East Carolina starting quarterback Holden Allers will not play this weekend. And as speculation, it's because of a COVID-19 test, according to Big Man on Campus from Barstool Sports. As a result, without the starting quarterback, can ECU actually hit their season average of 33 points per game against a Navy defense that is average? I don't think so. I think Navy's offense is going to get going, especially against an ECU defense allowing 41.3 points per game. Again, Navy -2. Temple -12 tomorrow. Temple offense scored 29 points in their first game of the season. And their second game is against a UCF defense tomorrow, which is one of the worst defenses in all of the AAC, allowing 32.2 points per game. Here's a very outside-the-box pick for you tomorrow. Liberty, 2.5 at Syracuse. This is the second year at Liberty with Hugh Freeze, the former Ole Miss head coach. The offense is averaging 33 points per game over the last 2 years. Despite playing competitive schedule last year, they went 8-5, now they're 4-0 this year. Syracuse, they're a dumpster fire. They've cemented themselves as if they're not the worst team in the ACC, they're at least the worst defense in the ACC. They can't stop anybody on the ground, and the key to Liberty's offense is the run game. They have 2 running backs averaging over 85 rushing yards per game. That's Liberty -2.5. I'm also going Kentucky -6 over, Tennessee -6 over Kentucky. I think Kentucky is completely a fraudulent team. They're complete frauds. Also, NC State -4.5 over Duke. Devin Leary, he's going to throw for more touchdowns and yards on Duke.